Hey, it's Ryder, and I hope you're staying hydrated, well fed, and having a good time through the new update. I appreciate everybody's support on the last video, so I wanted to get this one out quickly. PvP can be really daunting, and there's a lot to learn. I'm afraid that people in the scene overcomplicate PvP for others, but that doesn't have to be the case. In fact, most of the convoluted outlooks on PvP come from a lack of understanding the basics, so I wanted to break down these barriers that prevent more players from comprehending the necessary steps needed to win a fight. On your screen, I provided an overview of topics, starting with a few chores to address before we're going into improving your actual skill. Starting with the bar setup, I've often seen players struggle with placing their abilities in the right spots, and this is usually tossed aside because people have preferences, but there are some objective changes to solve many issues that come from sloppy bar placements. The underlying thesis for a good bar involves the amount of bar swapping. In PvE, bar swapping has been historically used as a way of canceling longer animations, though in PvP, we prioritize smoothness. To put it simply, place all of your offensive abilities on your front bar and the defensives on the back bar. If your combo requires you to bar swap, you're spending precious time not effectively working towards your kill, but instead juggling two different bars. There are some exceptions to this rule, such as classic Soric placing Elemental Susceptibility and Haunting Curse on the back bar and their damage shield on the front bar. Users opting to use an Ice Staff on the back bar will also want to place Elisus on the back bar as well. Generally speaking, however, do your best to keep your offensive and defensive abilities separated. The less thinking you have to do, the easier it is to perform in PvP. My recommendation is to put abilities with the shortest timers on the left side and the longest timers to the right side. If you organize them in this way, your fingers don't have to move nearly as often. In a similar category, keybinds are paramount to your success. One of the most common points of resistance when learning to improve is changing your keybinds. People are easily accustomed to what they know and they don't give themselves enough time to relearn more optimal key placement. Imagine this. I'm an ESO player and I use Y for my potions. I may be used to it for years and justify that I'm comfortable with it, and that argument is totally fair, but it ignores the travel time it takes from your finger to hit Y versus another key like D to move right. Relearning keybinds requires a bit of time to get used to, but if you prevent your fingers from running all over the keyboard, you'll thank yourself later. To continue this point, organize your keybinds based on when you need them. For example, my mouse has all of my reaction buttons on it. I turned off double tap to roll dodge, and I recommend you do as well, and rebound mine to a mouse button instead. Your other hand will be busy keeping up your rotation and activating abilities, so binding non-abilities to the other hand can maintain a sense of mental organization when it comes to translating your brain to the game. I've also included interrupt or bashing on the mouse button as well, as breaking free quickly is vital to avoid burst damage. For my final note of keybinding, set up tab targeting. If you're unaware what this is, ESO has a primitive form of maintaining a lock on a target. While it isn't robust like other MMOs, setting your tab key to highlight a target can keep you focused during all that happens during a fight. You can also set this to use one of the target markers in game, though I personally don't do this, so I can't speak onto the effectiveness of this feature. Now that we've taken care of some of the boring chores required for optimal PvP combat, we can examine what a fight really is. While a fight might seem like a lot is happening, we can break any of those fights into a fundamental, and this is true across most games. In ESO and other PvP games, fights are, at their core, races to meet a win condition. For those aren't familiar, a win condition is a set of circumstances required for you to beat your opponent. Both players are racing to meet these circumstances before the other, and the first one to do so will win. The win condition for each setup varies, but it can also be broke down simply. Dot setups rely on constant damage to outpace their opponent's burst and healing over time abilities. If their damage over time outpaces constant healing output from their opponent, the dot player wins. A player using a burst setup, however, achieves their win condition when their bursts line up perfectly and sometimes require a bit of crit fishing to achieve this, but more on that later. When a burst player notices an opportunity presented in the form of a low HP target, the burst player can achieve their win condition. Regardless of how comfortable you are with your DPS rotation, you need to understand both the conditions required by yourself to win, but also your opponent. If you fail to comprehend either of these, your chances of winning drop dramatically, as you either can't anticipate or counter effectively, or set yourself up to kill your opponent. Ask yourself, what will they do in order to kill me, and what will I do to kill them? This brings us to the next section, which is how to answer the first part of that question. Predicting your opponent's win condition almost solely relies on visuals you can determine before the fight even begins, but also within their first few seconds. Before subclassing, this was an easy task to accomplish. Fighting a DK, they're going to use dots. Fighting a Sork, all pressure and burst. Fighting a Nightblade, a Templar, or a Warden, they're going to burst. With players being able to select any skill lines, however, the lines are blurred, but that doesn't mean they're unreadable. We can use context clues to gather what an enemy's build is based on what we know about the classes before subclassing. Not every build will be the same, but if you see any of the abilities listed under the burst section of this image, this is a clear telegraph that your opponent will be looking for an opportunity to match all of their timers on you. Later in the video, I'll explain what this means in greater detail, but if you see any of these abilities cast, know that their burst is coming soon. On the other side, these are the tells that your opponent is using a dot setup and wants to tick you down quickly. All of these are entirely uncommon and even rare outside of Stormhaven dueling, so I won't go into great detail about this, but I recommend using the Cleanse CP, or a set like Mara's Bomb, or Word Tree if these continue to pester you. Like any race, you can either focus on simply beating your opponent to their win condition, which is referred to as playing aggressive, or you can be patient, which is referred to as playing passively. As a player, you'll have to confront your build and make the choice which is better for you in your setup. If this point doesn't make a lot of sense, consider ganking Nightblades to be the epitome of playing aggressive, and permablock tanks being an incredibly passive playstyle. Ideally, you'll find which end of the spectrum works best for you, though I recommend playing aggressive, as reaching your win condition quicker almost always works better than playing passively. During this race, however, understand that either player reaching their burst combo doesn't necessarily equate to a win condition being met. If I'm holding block and a Nightblade uses incap and 2 bow procs on me, they wasted their entire burst and now go back to the metaphorical starting position of the race. It's really easy for either player to toss aside their win due to impatience, which brings me to my next point. Achieving your win condition requires you to focus up and not panic. Landing the final blow on your opponent requires patience. Even if you set up every ability timer correctly, this doesn't guarantee your enemy will fall over. This brings us to the point of kill windows. This is a term that refers to the opportunity presented to effectively finish your opponent off, thus meeting your win condition. Recognizing these kill windows will lead you to more consistent fights and allow you to challenge much better players than the average battleground enjoyer. Before I get ahead of myself, let's fall back to some fundamentals. In PvE, rotations are simple. Keep up your timers, and when one of them hits 0, do it again. But PvP is entirely different. For the video, we'll only focus on bursts rather than dot gameplay, as this will be found in nearly every build. Burst damage in PvP revolves around matching many timers to hit 0 at the same time. We'll be using a timeline, separated by 1-second intervals, to display this concept. Deep Fissure is a skill that exemplifies the concept of the delayed burst after activation. The skill takes 3 seconds to deal its damage, and then again another 6 seconds later. On its own, predicting when this ability will activate allows us to add on to this ability. In this case, we'll also use Power of the Light. After we activate Shulks, we use Power of the Light, but you may notice their damage activates at separate times, thus demonstrating the issue here. Burst builds require damage to activate simultaneously rather than fragments as seen above. If you're using a build from online or created one on your own, that might seem good on paper but poor in practice. This could stem from the issue displayed on screen. The order of which abilities are activated is the single most important step in PvP, so let me show you how to address this. If we first activate Power of the Light, wait 3 seconds, then activate Deep Fissure, both abilities will detonate on the same tick, resulting in a much higher burst and disallowing opponents to recover. Now we can fill the timeline a bit more, throwing in spammables between our Power of the Light and Deep Fissure. While you're using your spammable, observe the opponent's health. If they are at a low enough point that you think you can meet your win condition and burst them down, activate your ultimate ability the tick before your other burst will go off, or use a stun as well. In the image provided, I'm listing Dawnbreaker as the ultimate used just before Deep Fissure and Power of the Light explode, as this will both stun and burst the opponent. For your own build, create a timeline like I have and map out your abilities. If you cannot confidently express the correct order of abilities, pause and try this exercise on your own. If all of your timers are correct, your opponent is at a lowest HP, and your burst still cannot kill them, evaluate if the error is on you or the build. As I mentioned in my previous video, blaming one or the other is really easy, but clipping your fights and watching them back will tell you the honest truth. Another way of determining your damage capability is to use a friend. Ask them to provide major and minor resolve to themselves, and to use 1 or 2 healing over time abilities. Invite them to a duel and perform your burst combo. If the damage isn't satisfactory or entirely lackluster, revisit your sets and your champion points to help solve this issue. Let's step back to that metaphor of a race to win condition. There will be times your opponent has reached the point of realizing their victory. Their bursts are lined up, your HP is not full, and your burst is not ready. This happens in almost every fight, and you need to be prepared for this. When you realize your opponent can burst you and you can't beat them in a DPS race, go to your backbar immediately. There's no point in shipping damage when you are at risk of losing the fight. I notice a lot of new players always trying to put out some type of damage, but this is actually what often leads to their defeat. Before we go into abilities, there's another half of surviving most players miss, that being maneuverability. For this video, maneuverability will refer to blocking, dodging, or breaking line of sight. I often see players simply hitting a burst heal or any other ability, but fail to mitigate damage in the simplest of ways. In PvP, abilities alone will not prevent your death, and you'll need to get comfortable with expanding your options. The simplest way to survive is to either block or roll dodge. Blocking will mitigate a huge amount of damage at the cost of quickly draining your stamina bar, and roll dodging will offer set periods of time of immunity to most direct damage. The option that works best for you is determined by your build, so confront that before moving forward. Either blocking or roll dodging is a perfectly acceptable tool to use in addition to your abilities, and I cannot recommend this enough to players who don't do this already. On to the abilities. After you've taken a breath and swapped to your backbar, you're going to have some important decisions to make, but don't panic and go over your ability prioritization list. The order in which you should activate abilities or take other actions varies depending on your hit points. This section will start with scenarios where you are high HP and performing correctly, and move into scenarios where panic might take over. In the case you're full HP and you've rightly anticipated an upcoming burst, you're going to prepare accordingly. First, keep up your major resolve. If this drops during their burst, you're giving your opponent around 8% more damage. Second, if you have a cleanse, drop any debuffs that might be active on you, like Major Breach. Finally, activate your healing over time abilities to give yourself insurance in case you're unexpectedly stunned. Failure to activate healing over time abilities extends your opponent's window of opportunity. If you have additional time, throw off a heavy attack or two to top up your resources. This will let you prepare for parts of the fight where you might have wished you had more resources. Many inexperienced players solely rely on potions and recovery for resource management, but this is a bad idea and comes from player ignorance of when an opportunity to kill actually occurs. Once you recognize you can't outburst your opponent in the next few seconds, heavy attacking for sustain is, in many cases, a much smarter idea. Things won't always go well though, even if you correctly anticipate their burst. Let's say you're immediately at 50% HP and realize too late that you can die in the next 3 seconds. Immediately use your burst heal, and also roll dodge, block, or break line of sight from your target. If you only heal without supplementing this with any maneuverability option, your heal will go to waste and your HP bar will tick down quickly. If you do this correctly and your HP returns to nearly maximum, you can refer to the previous priority list. To prevent the second case from occurring, you can make sure all of your hots and buff are up at all times. If you get good at this part, you can actually outpressure your opponent so that you never have to fall back on your backbar and you can continue pummeling into them. In fact, this is the ideal way of playing for more reasons than just that. Defensive abilities cost far more than offensive abilities, and if you find yourself sitting on your backbar most of the time, you're actually creating a positive feedback loop that locks yourself there, as you'll run out of resources, causing you to heavy attack, which then allows your opponent to burst you without consequence, which causes you to heal, draining resources, and the cycle repeats. This brings us back to the idea of reaching a win condition. If you're unable to fulfill your burst combo, You're at the start of the race the entire time, and your opponent can constantly look for an opportunity to kill you. If you find that you're sitting on your back bar the whole time, instead of investing into more defenses, look for ways of keeping up high pressure. After all, you're only on your back bar the whole time because you're not able to get any burst off your enemy. More damage is often the key to higher survivability in ESO PvP. Make your opponent afraid. To end this section, I want to examine the potential weapons to have on your back bar just in case you're not already running one of these. Commonly ran weapons include the sword and shield, the ice staff, and the restoration staff. Each weapon has their specific use, but you need to fully understand why each weapon is run. On your screen, I've attached an image to give a quick explanation of where to run each weapon, but to give a much more detailed explanation would extend this video far past the desired length, so I recommend pausing the video and checking out the weapon details online for yourself. Put simply, sword and shield gives more block mitigation, restoration staves give you a lot of healing and magicka, and ice staves give you breach and can either cost magicka or stamina depending if you take tri-stat focus or not. More broadly speaking, another way to improve your PvP prowess is to weave. Light attack weaving is crucial. If you're familiar with this concept and its importance already, skip ahead a bit to get into block casting. If you're unsure what light attack weaving means, it is the act of using a light attack after every ability. There's countless videos online about how to do this, and add-ons like Combat Metronome will help you to time this. Light attacks and weapon abilities will trigger your enchantments, as well as adding a lot of additional damage. Some sets also trigger from light attacks. If this concept might seem complicated, practice at a dummy a few minutes per day until you get the hang of it. Block casting is a term most PvEers are unfamiliar with. Any non-channeled or non-cast time ability can be activated while you're blocking at the cost of not being able to light attack. As mentioned, blocking offers a high amount of mitigation, and we can use this offensively. Many windows of opportunity are closed either due to healing from the enemy or our own HP being at a critical level. We can actually comfortably stay at this lower HP threshold if we block while we're on the offensive. In duels, I win a lot of fights just by using this method, and my opponent doesn't. Even if my opponent and I are both at 40% HP, if I'm taking 60% less damage than they are, I'm much closer to my win condition and I can win the duel. You don't have to hold the block the whole time though, and in fact, you can weave in blocks just like a light attack. During many times in a fight, if you're on the offensive, try blocking between abilities rather than tossing out a light attack. Oftentimes, your opponent will tunnel in and focus on their own burst, seeing you're not on your back bar, only to realize their HP fell much quicker than yours. Blocking is a powerful tool that you'd be remiss not to include in your kit. The final section of advice I have is positioning. It's a pretty broad term and carries various definitions depending on the speaker, but for the purposes of this video, positioning will refer to where your character is relative to your opponent or opponents. Just like maneuverability being an incredible but underutilized tool, positioning will far extend your capabilities beyond your build. Breaking line of sight, or LOSing, is a tactic to use across MMOs and other games to draw enemies towards you. Tanks often use this to clump enemies together for their DPS, but will employ the concept in a similar fashion for a contrasting outcome. When faced with too many enemies or simply too much pressure from one, you can LOS your target to prevent any of their offensive abilities from damaging you. Take for example this clip, where I'm attacked by two werewolves and a stealth sniper in Imperial City. I was in the open field, but as soon as I duck behind barricades and trees, I've eliminated 1/3 of the attackers from damaging me, but this concept actually goes further than that. One of the werewolves fell behind, and because I hung to the sides of the objects, his character couldn't properly see me, thus preventing his attacks. So, just by moving, I've erased 2/3 of all incoming damage. Use this to your advantage, and use this often, just as 1vxers do in towers across Cyrodiil. In duels, however, LOSing is considered bad manners. Whether you agree or not that etiquette exists is your own discretion, but generally avoid running behind trees and whatnot in a 1v1. You can, however, still utilize positioning in an advantageous way. In a fight, placing yourself behind your opponent prevents incoming attacks and spammables, removing much of an enemy's pressure. Doing this, however, often requires your speed to surpass your opponents. This isn't always true, but it's far easier to constantly reposition if you can do so faster than they can. This has some unique advantages as well depending on your build. Nightblade's Assassin's skill line has benefits from flanking, as well as opening up the Backstabber as a potential champion point pick. This technique, while not incredibly advanced, can get some getting used to, so if you're new to PvP, don't try to learn this immediately. Instead, Focus on your burst combo, your defensive priorities, and using dodge or block more often. To close out, there are many other smaller changes you can do to improve your performance in PvP, but I'm not the biggest fan of lengthy yap videos. Instead, if you think there's anything I missed, let me know in the comments, and if you have any questions or scenarios I might have overlooked, tell me. That's it for the video. Thanks for watching, and stay hydrated.